Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Distinguished Speaker Series led by Dean Bill Boulding. I'm delighted to welcome Mary Barra back to the Fuqua School of Business. And given the transportation revolution that we're in, it is especially wonderful to have you here with us at the conclusion of Energy Week at Duke. Ms. Barra is currently CEO and Chairman of the General Motors Corporation, a global automotive leader. Taking on the role of CEO in 2014 and that of Chairman in 2016, Ms. Barra actually began her career at GM in 1980 as a co-op intern in the Pontiac Motor Division. The lesson for many of us in the room may be, though, that internships can lead to the C-suite. Ms. Barra has set an innovative strategy that is focused on transforming personal mobility and envisions a future of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion, which could have fundamental sustainability impacts. As a leader of more than 180,000 employees, Ms. Barra, you've said that success is a team effort, and that some of the critical factors you look for during the hiring process are high degrees of integrity and people who integrate themselves into being part of that team. These ideas align closely with the principles of consequential leadership that we emphasize here at Fuqua. Ms. Barra also has ties to Duke. She has received an honorary degree of science, a doctor of science, from Duke at last year's commencement. And she is the proud parent of not one, but two Duke undergrads. And she and her husband currently, Ms. Barra and her husband also currently serve as the co-chairs of the Class of 2019 Parents Committee. We're so excited to have you here with us tonight. Please join me in giving another enthusiastic welcome to Mary Barra.
Thank you.
So, Mary, welcome. It's fantastic to have you here as the capstone for Energy Week. And it's hard to believe that it's been 2 years since you were here last and 5 years roughly since you became CEO. So wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
I thought I'd start with picking up on part of your introduction here, which is, I'm going to read a quote from you, which is, "To be truly great, your team must have diversity of thought and be willing to collaborate constructively." And so this is very much in line with our philosophy here. But what I'm wondering about is, how do you build a culture? How do you put the values in place where you do get that kind of collaborative, constructive collaboration?
Well, I think you've got to create the climate where people feel that they can speak up. That there's not fear in the organization. And so we work really hard to not be hierarchical. Good ideas can come from anywhere. And we truly want people to speak up in a respectful way at an appropriate time. But to really be in meetings and have different points of view and debate those, because if we all just come into the room and we all think the same and immediately come to the same answer, we haven't really circled the issue well enough, I think, to really debate what's the right next step. And one of the ways you can also do it is by building a diverse team. And so, the leadership team at General Motors, about 50% of them have not been lifers at the company like me, coming from different industries, coming from different countries. We also have gender diversity and have many different backgrounds represented. And those different experiences, different cultures, that too, we encourage it at the table when we're making big decisions. There's often a time where I'll go person by person to make sure everyone's heard.
So one of the things that you've said is that everyone wants to contribute, and so the key for the leader is simply to allow people to do what they want to do.
Right.
So what's interesting in terms of your reaction to some questions you've got in the past is that sometimes you don't give a predictable answer, and so someone asked you about your response to failure, and what derailed you, what set you back, and your response was, "There's always a way to move forward." So you don't think about failure and you don't think about that dimension. But the question is, how do you get that mindset that itself is a response to negative events, which is, hey, something bad may have happened, but there's always a way forward. Is that something that you learned, or is that something that was taught to you by, from growing up with your parents? How did you kind of get that lesson through your head?
I don't know. I've never really thought about it that way. I think some of it does come from my parents because I saw them work really hard and accomplish great things. And they grew up in the Depression, so they believed in the power of hard work and that you work before you play. So there was that element. I think part of it is having an engineering background because you should be able to solve it. And then I also think, and I probably got this from my mother, I'm an optimist. People say, is the glass half full or half empty? I usually tell my team, look, for me, usually the glass is 3/4 full. That's just the way I approach it. And so you are where you are. You can either, bemoan the past, or you can say, okay, what am I going to do about it? And I think that action orientation and believing you can find a solution is how I approach it. So it probably came from a number of places.
Okay. So you've achieved incredible success in your career as the CEO of one of the world's iconic companies and brands. And this is a world that has been traditionally male-dominated. And I saw that recently you were named #1 among 200 companies for your efforts to achieve gender equity. So what gave you that #1 ranking? What have you been able to put into place to take a company which has been traditionally male-dominated to move forward in terms of gender equity?
I think for when that specific study on gender equity, one of the things they look at is your board. And I'm fortunate to have a wonderful board and a wonderful lead director, Tim Solsa, who was the CEO of Cummins for about a decade. And he very much believes in the power of diversity. You can see it if you study Cummins results. And so and frankly, I sit in the chair I sit in now because one of the best kept secrets is General Motors was working on diversity 20 years ago. So if I hadn't been pushed and given stretch assignments 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been in a place where I was, considered for the job I'm in now. So there's many members of our board that as we look and again want that diversity, and we very actively build our board, but I wouldn't say we specifically went and said we want to be 50% men and 50% women. We wanted the best candidate, but we required the search firm we work with to give us diverse slates. And once you start, if you work with a diverse slate, you're going to, I think, get to a diverse board. That's one of the reasons at General Motors where we require for all of our executive positions, we require a diverse slate of candidates. And what I started to do, because it's easy to write a name, okay, who did you select, what was the diverse slate you considered? And I also we added, working with my HR leader, okay, what if you weren't able to, necessarily have diversity as you picked this candidate, or maybe didn't even have a diverse slate, because I don't want you to just put names there for the sake of it. But if you can't put a name there, what are you doing that in 3 years you will have a diverse candidate? So just really getting people to think, because to me, diversity is all about the pipeline. And it's about not just gender diversity, it's about all forms of diversity. But that specific, I think, gave a lot of credit to the amount of diversity I have on my leadership team, but even more so the diversity that we have on the board.
One thing that you point to in terms of your own career is that you had some fantastic male mentors, and that there are a couple of things that really stuck with you and helped you as you advanced in your career. One was they told you, stop saying sorry.
Yes.
And so was this an issue for you personally, or do you think this is a general gender effect?
I think on the I'm sorry, I think it's a woman thing. I don't know why, because I've actually now, mentored women to say, please stop saying you're sorry. Because it's not like, there's times you need to say you're sorry, so don't get me wrong, but, if somebody over on the, across the table spills a glass of wine or a glass of water and you say, oh, I'm sorry, well, you've had nothing to do with it. So I challenge all of the women in the room, how often do you say you're sorry when you really had nothing to do with it, or it's raining outside, or the door closed, or the light burned out? Those were not your fault. You don't need to say but women kind of start with, if something didn't go right, they say they're sorry, and I think it's a perception issue of not appearing to maybe be as confident or as capable that you're taking responsibility for all those things. So it was something and it was hard to break for me. I mean, I had it was actually a colleague I worked with, a male colleague, and it was probably a good part of 6 months before I finally broke myself of the habit. And every time it was hard too, because every time I said it, he'd be like, "What are you sorry for?" And about the 800th time he says that, you start to go, "Okay, I've got to reprogram myself." But I'd ask you to test yourself on that.
So another piece of advice you got was to stop letting men interrupt you. So how do you do that?
You interrupt them back and say, "Let me finish." And the first time you do it nicely, and I would say most times you don't have to do it more than one time. But it's the "let me finish." And you have to do that.
Continuing on this line of inquiry, I got a few more questions. You said what was the one piece of advice you would give to men to interact more effectively with women, and your answer was stop making assumptions. What kinds of assumptions are men making that are interfering with their ability to really get the best out of the women that they're working with?
I would say a common assumption I see in business is people will make, men and maybe and leaders, so it's not just male leaders, but will make an assumption of, oh, this person recently got married, therefore they're not able to take a transfer to China, or this woman just had children, so of course she can't take this job that requires irregular hours. And my message is ask before you assume. You don't know what their social, or their support structure is in the home if they've just had a child. You don't know the flexibility of the partner. You may not even know if the person has a significant other or what they're so don't assume, ask. Don't take them out of career opportunities by an assumption you have unless you really know. And don't assume, one of the things I always tell people is, there's times where you may say, no, I'm not mobile right now, or no, I can't take that job that's going to have, sporadic hours. But it's not a forever. It's not a forever answer. It may be, when my parents are ill and excuse me, and I want to be home, or I want to, be able to tend to them when I need to. But that will change. Or it may be when you have an infant, and that will change. And so an answer isn't an answer for a career. It's an answer for a period of time in a person's life.
One of the things that's in the category of unintended consequences is that one of the effects of the Me Too movement has been that the Lean In organization reports that 3 times as many men are uncomfortable now with mentoring women. Is there a solution to this challenge? Because if we say that women don't have access to mentors of all genders, that's totally unfair. So how do we make sure that people of all genders have mentors of all genders?
I think that is something I actually did worry about because what I found in the Me Too movement is the men that were the most worried about it were the men that didn't need to be worried about it at all, and because they just didn't need to worry about it all. Leave it there. You know what I mean. And so a couple things is one. There's been research done that actually group mentoring is very, very successful. And it's actually, from a leader's perspective, more efficient. If you can mentor 2 or 3 people at the same time, you not only are being able to influence more people, but then the mentoring, the peer mentoring that goes on can be very good, and people learning what somebody else is struggling with, so then maybe they're not struggling with it now or later. So one of the solutions we've talked at the company is to do group mentoring, and then just also pick a place that's an open space where you can still have a private conversation. And I mean, it sounds silly that we have to worry about that in today's world, but those are strategies we've used because I very specifically did not want to see in General Motors the very successful mentoring stop because people were worried.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears, and the last time we spoke, you said that GM is transforming itself into a tech company. and that it clearly was a tech company, because if you look at the three of the biggest things facing it, you've got electrification, you've got autonomous cars, and you've got ride sharing. And what could be more high-tech, more Silicon Valley than those trends? One of the things that you've gotten a fair amount of pushback on is you have said, we're going to have self-driving cars on the road that we'll start selling next year, and people keep saying you can't possibly do that. So is that a realistic goal?
Well, when we talk about it, we say that we're going to have successfully developed the technology to a point that we can demonstrate, and we've worked quite depth to be able to say that the car is better than a human driver, and be able to measure that and statistically demonstrate that. So that's what we're working on. We'll plan to deploy that in a ride-sharing fleet. So it'll still be a geofenced area. So then what will happen past that point is the car will continue to learn, and the cost will come down that allow us to deploy more vehicles and more, starting with dense urban environments. So we believe with the rate of iteration that we are accomplishing, that we are still on track to do that. And right now the regulatory framework is fairly supportive. There is, if you think, I think when I was speaking at a group one time and a couple people raised their hand and said, I've already ridden in an autonomous vehicle. And my answer to them was, no, you haven't. There is no truly a level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicle out on the road today. And so the framework that's coming from government is actually pretty supportive, because they recognize if we can deploy autonomous vehicles, we have the opportunity to get rid of 90% of the fatalities that occur. Because right now on roads today, 90% of fatalities, and last year there were 40,000 of them in the United States alone, were caused by human error. And so they see the technology as the promise to deliver a safer roadway to all, everyone in the country. So I think, there's a path there. There's still hurdles yet to accomplish on a regulatory perspective. There's bills in Congress right now that we're working to enable us to get to that point. But we do believe with the rate of iteration, we will have the technology to a point where we can do that. But what we always say when we say that is we'll be gated by safety. We have Super Cruise on the road right now, which is a driver assist tool. We delayed that several months until we were satisfied that it met the safety standards. And that's one of the things that General Motors brings to the space is we've been putting cars on the road for 100 years. We understand road safety, automotive safety, and also automotive grade of what it takes for a system to work in the dynamic environment that our vehicles operate today.
Yeah. So the last time we spoke, you said of the three things that I mentioned, that autonomous cars and electrification, those aren't so hard for you because those are engineering tasks, and you're a really great engineering company. But that ride sharing, that was a social issue, and that was more complicated. So has the autonomous cars and the ride sharing initiatives, have they converged given the activity with Cruise?
Well, we still have Maven, which is our car sharing, and right now, and the great thing since we've last talked is Maven has probably pivoted about 3 or 4 times. And so unlike an autonomous vehicle or a regular vehicle that you have a pretty well-defined vehicle development process and you test and you validate and you lock it down and you put it out on the road because it has many safety critical systems and features in it. With ride sharing or car sharing, we've been able to pivot with several different models and kind of really develop in the company this minimal viable product mindset, and then keep changing as we learn more about customer preferences and demands. So we still have Maven operating and collecting data. We will deploy in a ride-sharing environment. On that front, we've said it will either be our own, we'll work with one or more partners. So we really believe that the hardest equation to solve in autonomous is the technology. And once we accomplish that, there'll be multiple business models and ways to deploy.
So one of the speaking of partners, that Honda is now a partner in this process. So after a lifetime of competing with Honda, they're now your partner. How do you make that kind of transition?
Well, Honda's a company that we've worked with on and off for decades. More recently, probably in the last eight or so years, we started working with them on fuel cells. And it made a lot of sense because if you think about the cost that goes into developing technology that is not 2 years out, and maybe not even 5 years out, but over the horizon, especially in large scale, to do that development together and to be able to share the learnings and share the cost makes a lot of sense. And frankly, it's something our industry needs to do more of. And so we ended up finding as an organization we could work together quite well on fuel cells. We then extended that to parts of the electrification for electric vehicles. And then it was kind of a natural next step when you look at some of the future technologies we're working on to join forces as it relates to autonomous vehicles. So they're a great partner.
Yeah. So in your introduction, the zero mantra was mentioned, the zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion. Mm-hmm. And of course, these three streams of work contribute to all three of those. You seem very committed to electrification and the zero emissions target to the extent that when the president gave kind of a window of opportunity to say, let's roll back some regulations, you actually said, let's not do that. Can you kind of explain why you took that position?
The position that we took was the end game is to get to electric vehicles or to get to zero emission vehicles. And we believe electrification and then later fuel cells is a big piece of that. Where we've got, if you look at the fuel economy and the greenhouse gas regulations, it's imperfect to be talking about this as Energy Week is concluding. To really address those issues, you've got to get to this zero emission world. When we started this back in 2012, a lot of the low-hanging fruit of improvements we could make with internal combustion engines, those have been made. And the next step to get the internal combustion engine even more fuel efficient and greenhouse gas less of an impact becomes very expensive. And then you put the market into a place where people are going to say, I can't, a car company or an automotive company isn't going to produce vehicles to lose money. But we recognize affordability. For most people, a car or a truck or a crossover is one of the most expensive purchases they make. And so if that gets too expensive, people are going to buy used cars. And then frankly, from an environmental perspective, we're going to be worse off because every year cars get better from a fuel economy, from a greenhouse gas perspective. So when we factored all that in, we said what we need to do is jump and get to electric vehicles as quickly as we can, as opposed to focusing and we still said we should have improvements every year, from 19 to 20 to 21, but not force all of this expensive technology on internal combustion engines. Jump to how quickly can we get to EVs, and can we work with governments and private industry to build the charging network, to incentivize people, because one of the things people still are a little worried about with an electric vehicle is we've kind of solved range anxiety. When you get into close to 250 miles per charge, people aren't so worried they're going to run out of a charge, but if it's going to be their only vehicle, then they're worried about occasionally I am going to need to charge. So then it becomes charge anxiety. There's actually more charging infrastructure out there than people understand. But how do we really build that out? And so our recommendation to the administration is let's move quickly as we can and get to the end game, as opposed to what we're going to do in the next couple years that is frankly, I think, going to have a negative impact on the environment because the expense will drive people to older cars.
So you've made enormous progress in your 5 years as CEO in transforming GM, and yet apparently you go around saying the following all the time, which is, don't confuse progress with winning. So why are you saying that?
Well, I think being at a company for 38 years, you can get, there was a big portion of my career where General Motors, had a lot of issues and was struggling. And if you're 50% behind your competition, but you get all excited about making a 20% improvement, you're still last. And so, people be like, but I improved 5% or I improved 20%. Yeah, but if we're not winning, you can't get it. Yes, that's a milestone on the journey, but if you're not keeping up, it really, I think, gets an organization complacent, or they feel good and they're losing. And so I always try to, that's why, when people say, well, we did this, okay, are we winning or not? And if you don't have a focus on what it takes to win in the marketplace, especially in the automobile industry that is so competitive and getting more competitive with more, non-traditional competition coming in because it's an important and attractive market, you're going to lose. And so, you have to be focused on winning across whatever you're doing. And so that's why I really, I try to say, okay, that's good, but now what are we going to do to win?
So how do you define winning? What does winning mean in your setting?
It depends across a huge range of things. With every new vehicle that we put onto the road, we want to be number one in the segment in the countries that we're selling. And, we don't want to just launch a vehicle to compete. We want to launch a vehicle to win the segment, to win the customer. So, we objectively can measure that. We want to be first with new technology, getting in vehicles and getting through technology that customers want. Across it, and then we also want to have financial success, because a lot of when you do a vehicle that is as technical or autonomous vehicles, how do we do that in a way that we've optimized for the customer that they say, yes, you won because I can afford your vehicle and drive that financial success as well.
Yeah. One area where it's been frustrating to see for you, I'm sure, a lack of progress is with the stock price. Mm-hmm. And why is it that the market has not responded favorably to the enormous amount of progress? And what will it take to see the market valuation tick up in line with the transformation that's underway?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of reasons. It's something I worry about every day, I work on every day, and probably am more frustrated than anyone every day. But you have to step back and say, okay, let's understand. And some of it is the industry. Right now, there's a fear, but frankly, a lot of the analysts have been predicting there's going to be a downturn for the last 3 years. And in a cyclical business, you don't want to buy right before the downturn. So, predicting the downturn, and from a General Motors perspective, candidly, the last downturn we didn't live through. We went bankrupt. And so, that's a reality. So there's many people, even though we can do all kinds of charts and presentations to show here's the way the company was then, here's now, here's the strength of our balance sheet. We do downturn planning. You can do all that, but there's some investors that are still going to say, you know what, I hear you, and I actually maybe even want to believe you, but I want to see you do it. And I'll catch you on the way up once you've demonstrated and the market starts to recover. That's one issue. The second, I think, big issue is the transformation. And people are looking at traditional auto companies, like they look at across many industries, look at traditional companies saying, will they be here in 2, 3, 5, 10 years? Or will they be replaced by new companies with new ideas, startups that can come from anywhere? And so that's why we've so aggressively worked on transforming ourselves, and in that case bought a startup, because we said that was the fastest way that we felt and then working together with all the expertise we have on AVs. So I think there's a lot of reasons where, we're a 100 plus year old company, but really we're a now 8-year-old company with a 100-year background. Because we started new in 2010 when we became an IPO, and we still have to earn our way because of that history and demonstrate that we can move at the speed that you have to move at to win. So I view it as, because of our 100-year history, we have to work harder and demonstrate that we will, and that's what motivates me every day. So yes, do I get bummed out every now when I look at it? Sure, but frankly, what it does, remember that glass is 3/4 full, it just motivates me to work even harder.
And there is also always a way to move forward.
Exactly, exactly, and we will.
So one of the things that's become more complicated as you lead an organization is the reality that we're living in times that are very divisive. There's a great deal of conflict along many different dimensions, and yet you've put a big stake in the ground on this idea of we want people to collaborate constructively. Mm-hmm. So as all these things are happening in society, inevitably they come into the workforce environment. What do you do to keep people pulling together towards the same goals?
Well, I think creating a vision that motivates people, and when we rolled out zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion over a year ago now, that really has rallied everyone. And it doesn't matter what you're working on. It doesn't matter if you're a tax attorney or you're working on internal combustion engines. They know the importance of the role they're doing today and but they're proud to work for a company that is working and motivated to achieve that type of vision. But we also work very hard on our work on creating a workplace of choice, and so making sure there's tolerance and respecting different views and welcoming inclusion and again speaking up. We just over the last 2 years, I met with in diagonal slice me or in small group meetings, I met with all of our top 260 executives from around the world to say, how do we behave as leaders when we're at our best? And after listening to 260 of our senior leaders tell us, we developed behaviors, actually we call them leadership commitments, because so much of it was creating the environment where people can debate and constructively look at issues, come up with the best issues, and they're empowered to do that. And so that's something we work very hard at the company to create that environment, because we truly believe it's important for not only working together, but it's important for speed. If the whole organization is waiting for a small handful of people at the top of the company to tell them what to do, we're going to lose. So, that kind of working together in teams and collaboration and constructive debate is what I think enables us to win and gives us the speed that's required to win.
So another area that's become more complicated, especially for a global company where China and the US are both incredibly important markets to you, is how do you navigate the current challenges around trade between those two countries and stay on the good side in both countries?
Well, one is to have the same message in both countries. But we talk about there's things that need to be improved from a trade relationship perspective. There are some issues that need to be addressed from a China trade perspective, but there's also so much benefit to both the US and China if we can have a auto industry and all the technology that's occurring in the way we get from point A to B to be done together and to leverage those markets, to leverage the supply base, leverage the learnings. We have a joint venture partner we've had now for over 21 years that is incredibly strong, and we work really well together. And so, we believe just continuing to develop that we're working well together. It's actually raising the economy for both from what we do, where the business benefit from both is very important.
So as a global company, you believe in global exchange and in your industry, goods and services are moving across borders in every direction in order to provide the best possible value to your customers. And as you've been involved in some of these conversations, as we see the rise of nationalism versus the belief in global exchange, you seem to consistently make the following points, which are, well, if you put into place trade policies that lead to higher prices, we're going to sell fewer new cars. Mm-hmm. And if we sell fewer new cars, there are going to be fewer jobs.
Right.
So is that message working in terms of reaching out to the people who are involved in the policy space?
I think it was very effective in the recent NAFTA negotiations. NAFTA, the revised or modernized NAFTA still has to go through Congress and be approved. But I actually think the different groups involved in the NAFTA negotiations across all three countries did a very good job of listening to business and listening to industry and understanding the complexities you talk about of how parts flow back and forth, and the finished good may have more even if you assemble a truck in Mexico, it might have more U.S. content as a percentage of value than just the fact that it was assembled in Mexico or Canada or the United States. And so I really feel they listened. And I think that was incorporated into the thinking of as they modernized NAFTA. And we still have to have it approved. But I think it did resonate, and I think the people really working and doing the day-to-day work, I give them a lot of credit, because it wasn't just they could go to one automaker, because everyone's got a little different situation, but they worked with all of them across 3 governments. So they need to be recognized for that.
Okay, good. So you're unusual in many ways, but one of the ways that's unusual is that you've stayed at the same company over an extended period of time. Surely there were times when other companies said, hey, come work for us. What thought process did you go through in making the decision, I want to stay where I am as opposed to I want to entertain some new opportunity?
A handful of reasons. I think early on, when you're not necessarily going looking for a new job, if you love the job you're doing and you're being given a lot of opportunity. And so early in my career, I had a lot of great opportunities. And because General Motors is such a large company, it's like I can look and say, I've probably had 7 careers at General Motors. When I look at the fact I've run a assembly plant, I've been the head of HR, I've been a senior leader in communications, had the opportunity to work for the chairman and the vice chairman on special projects earlier in my career. So as you have that opportunity to keep growing and learning and feeling like you're challenged, you're not really paying attention to other opportunities because you love what you're doing. As the company had harder times, and I was probably in the mid-20s of 20 years being there. For me, it was making a personal decision of, I've been here for a long enough time. I know what this company's capable of doing and being, and I know so many people in the company that are great, dedicated people, and I want to be a part of turning it around. And so that's what kept me there as we went through the restructuring, never knowing I would have the opportunity to have this job. But it just became important to me to do that. And I would also say, having been at the company for so long, we've had people who have left the industry and they want to come back, and they'll say there's just nothing like the auto industry. If you think about it, putting a car and truck and a car or a truck or an SUV on the road, how people make the decision. I get people sending me emails where they name their vehicles, or they'll tell me that their Tahoe took them through 10 years of their life, and including being treated for cancer, and they those kinds of things. You really get to connect with your customer, and it's a hard industry, but it's an exciting industry. It's got a bit of fashion, it's got tech. Again, it's got this really interesting relationship with the customer. And I find even people who have left the industry, they want to come back. So, and also I'm second generation, so I think a little of it was in my blood.
Yeah. So you touch on something which is the emotional feelings that people have about their cars and trucks, and that people are passionate about this industry. Do you worry as the industry is moving in this direction that some of that passion will leave as it becomes more of a tech-driven business and less about, are you going to be as excited about your car if it's an autonomous vehicle as if you're there driving?
I think the whole sharing economy, is going to change that relationship, and I expect it to. And so we look at it, in that case, as you get into autonomous vehicles, it's not only, yes, you want the technology to be safe and people to feel safe and the ride to be smooth, but also how do you engage with them when they're in the vehicle, how, or the vehicle that's transporting them, not being driven. How do you create a customer experience that they're going to connect to? So yes, it's going to change. I do believe, not in the next few years, but down the road, we will see more. If you can get autonomous vehicles down to under $1 a cost per mile, just to kind of, since it's the business school. Right now, if you do an Uber or a Lyft, your average is about $2.50 a mile, and that's kind of across the company. People think, and especially here, I'm sure how often you use Uber or Lyft, it's miles traveled, though, in the United States is less than 0.1% of total miles traveled are traveled with Uber or Lyft or different ride sharing. So there's this huge market, and in today's ride sharing, you're never going to get, the most expensive thing in today's ride sharing is the driver. That's a cost that's only going to go up. Cost of technology, when you get to autonomous, is only going to go down. You start to then have a lot more miles traveled that people are going to say, you know what? I'll take an autonomous vehicle as opposed to driving myself. So how do we create that experience in the autonomous vehicle is really how we look at. That's how we're going to engage that customer. But it will be a little different than the person who owns their truck and calls it Big Red. It will be different. So.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question and then turn it over to the audience. So as you think about the kind of talent that you need, what are you looking for in the people that you're hiring these days? What kinds of capabilities and skills?
Well, from a technical perspective, we definitely, the whole industry from a software perspective is, I would say, the industry and all of tech is competing for those jobs. Cruise automation, we look and, we're competing with Google and Facebook to get those, the people that do specifically the AI or machine learning type of work. But I would say across so that's a very focused area, or people who have experience in EVs, because that's just a shortage of talent right now. But across that more broadly, what we're looking for is, people who truly have a passion for the work they're doing. It's kind of, don't come here to, I actually had a call with because I talked to a lot of students. I had a call with a student who was graduating from business school, not this business school. And they I felt like the conversation I ended up having them, because the way they were talking about, well, here's what I want to do, but then I want to do this. And I said, you know what, to me, you sound like a renter. You're not committing. You're kind of coming like, I'm going to live here for 2 years. I'm going to see what I get, see what I learn. Then I'm going to move to my next bigger apartment. And then I was like, I'm looking for people who, I'm not saying, you don't need to sign up for 38 years like I have, but I'm looking for someone who's committed when they're there. Because think about it, when you're doing a job, if you're just passing through, you don't invest. One of the pieces of advice I give people is, if you're going to do a job, do it like you're going to do it for the rest of your life, because then you commit to it. Then you're looking at, how do I make it better? You're willing to make those investments to simplify something, to redo something, to work across functions, to make the job better. So I'm looking for people who are going to commit and invest. And again, not for a lifetime, but for the time they're there. I also want them to be excited about our industry. And then, as it was in the opening, integrity is something you can't train. One of the things I talk to our employees all the time is, we're going to do the right thing even when it's hard. And a lot of times people think, and I'm sure you have business ethics classes, and people think if they've got a really tough decision, they think they have a decision, but there's really only one, you know the right thing to do. And it might not look good for a quarter or for a year, but it's the right thing to do. And in a business, you're driving for long-term creation of shareholder value. So you've got to take the right steps. You've got to do the right thing. I talk to employees all the time is, when's the best time to solve a problem? The minute you know you have it. Because most problems don't get smaller and they don't go away on their own. And so, we're looking for people who are excited, committed, high integrity, and, want to invest. Again, for a period of time, and that you can kind of tell that and feel that. Like I said, I had a call with someone, and when I said that to him, he's like, well, what do you mean? And I explained it to him, and he's like, oh, but maybe it was because he wasn't interviewing for a job with me, he was just asking for advice, but I sure hope I influenced him how he acts at his next interview.
Terrific. Okay, questions from the audience?
Hi, thank you for coming and speaking with us. You were just talking about ethics. I have a follow-up ethics question. Hopefully this will be one of the harder questions. Everything will get easier from here. It's a challenging question. So when it comes to autonomous vehicles, I wanted to know how you think about ethics. The classic question for autonomous vehicles, I'm sure you've heard this many times, is if a vehicle has a choice has to make a tough choice of saving the people in the car or saving a pedestrian, what choice does it make? I want to know about how you're thinking about this at GM, and then also who even has the right to decide, should it be the car companies or should it be the government or some other group of, some other organization?
So it's an interesting question. I guess that when I look at it from a technology perspective, if you look at autonomous vehicles right now, one of the things in the way we define safe is how quickly the three different types, we have LiDAR, we have radar, we have cameras, and we fuse all that together because each of those sensors sees different things and can tell you what's happening in your environment. And we won't let the vehicle go faster than how quickly we can fuse all that information together to know what's happening exactly around us. So I look at it and say, if that technology is working the way working, and every time, every day, automotive grade type of capability, it's not going to have to make that choice because it's going to see it in enough time to stop. Now, you always can, just like driving a vehicle today, you can always have something drop in or dart out, and then the vehicle is going to respond, the same. The vehicle is going to do what a human does. It's going to try and stop as quickly as it can, or, when it sees it, is there a safe path around it? And so I don't look at it as you're going to be cruising down the highway and all of a sudden, car full of people, pedestrian, what should I do? And the technology in the vehicle is not going to go so fast that it can't have enough time to stop with that. And so that's the way I look at it, at the technology in general. It's not going to be put in that position. And the example I use is, think about a stoplight. How many times when you happen to notice that the light turned yellow, do you make that mental calculation? Am I going to speed up a little and go through? Or am I going to jam on the brakes? And an autonomous vehicle knows exactly when that light turned yellow, and knows, should I come to an appropriate stop, or should I continue at speed and go through the light? And so I think you have to think about what the technology can do and how we're going to gate it and what it grows to be able to do, so it doesn't put itself in that situation. Other than the fact that if something pops out of the sky, it's the same way a human's going to deal with it. So that's the way I think about it.
I'm pretty sure this question will be easier. So when did you know that you wanted to be a CEO? And were there key decisions that you made across your career, or key things that happened that led you to where you are right now?
So I probably decided I wanted to be CEO after they told me I was in consideration for CEO. It was not something I was aspiring to do. The way I've approached my whole career is I wanted to love what I was doing, and I wanted to have opportunities to continue to grow and develop. And so, one of the questions when I'd go early in my career and, meet with a mentor or meet with my boss, and they said, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I always hated that question because I wasn't sure. So, but I think because if you want to continue to grow and learn, and you're doing the job to the best of your ability, you get noticed. It gets back to that owning versus renting thing. And so I think what helped in my career was always, really committing to the job I was doing and getting noticed for the job that I did, that then gave me additional opportunities. As I got further in my career, there were certain things where I said, you know what, I'd rather do this type of work than that type of work. And then that's the kind of conversation you need to have with your leader, so they know what you're interested in, and then can say, okay, if you're interested in going in this direction, then you probably need to work on getting these 3 or 4 experiences that make you best qualified to do that. So that's kind of the path that I took. Again, I have had a pretty unique career at General Motors, working in so many different functions, and I really have enjoyed that. But the CEO part was shortly after they asked me, or told me I was being considered.
Thanks for sharing your career story. It's very inspiring. And also, I think GM's transformation story is pretty cool as well. And I have 2 questions related to that transformation. The first one is, you mentioned the automobile tech part is easy for you, but the social part is challenging. And part of that is the leading companies in those areas are completely different from traditional car manufacturers. They are in the likes of Google, Uber, and Didi in China. So they are completely tech company and also data-driven companies. And part of that is they have completely different business model and also different DNA of the company. So my first question is, what is your top strategy to address that challenge? And then, should I ask all of them? Or?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
And then my second question related to that is, also similarly, those companies are top companies in the world today, and they're very attracted to people who want to work there. And part of the reason is a lot of them have like very audacious missions and all value or mission driven. Is very different from profit driven companies. So in the likes of they want to make us multiplanetary species, or moving completely away from fossil fuel consumption society. Not just making cars, like cars is probably just one path towards that mission, and makes it really exciting to work for. And then my question related to that is, today is a lot of the young people, like millennials, the survey done that more than 50% of them, or a high percentage of them, wanted to work for that type of company and have a value and mission rather than just work for money. And how is GM, like, in terms of that type of change of people wanted to, like, finding meaning, I suppose, in their work? So those are the two questions.
Well, I think it does start with the company having the right values, and those values being aligned with the individual that chooses to work there, for the environment and the culture and what they're going to they're going to join. So I think creating the right culture and having the right values is an organizational requirement. I would say at General Motors, we have more than 40% of our employees have been with the company less than 5 years. And so we've attracted a lot of new talent, and that's not all college grads. Some of that is experienced hires as well. And what we have found, especially in the tech areas, is people want to go work for a company where they're going to see their technology be commercialized. And so we see that at Cruise Automation. We see that in people who want to work on vehicles. And so making sure that they know they're going to be empowered and have that opportunity, and that we are committed to the technology, we're committed to electrification, we're committed to autonomous, and we plan on commercializing it so they can see their work in the real world, I think is something that our employees and those interested have said is very, very important to us. And frankly, we've seen a lot of people come from other areas, especially in AV, when as SoftBank made the announcement that they were going to invest in us, as Honda, people said, wow, you guys are really committed. I want to go work here because you're going to get that done. So I think that's a piece of it. I think then on having a mission, one of the reasons we really focused on a very transformative mission of creating a world with zero crashes, zero emission, and zero congestion, is I do agree with you. People want to work for a company that it's more than, I would say, necessarily designing a vehicle today or selling a vehicle today. But I would also tell you, in the long term, you do need to care about creating shareholder value. There's no company that forever cannot be creating the right value for shareholders. I think it's a question of not an or, it's an and. How do you create that mission? How do you make the world a better place? How do you motivate people to get excited about that and create shareholder value over the long term?
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I really love everything you have to say. So my question is around autonomous vehicles and the potential for creating a car that is fully accessible to everyone despite a physical ability or disability. And so I wanted to know whether GM has thought about accessibility in creating autonomous vehicles, if there are any thoughts around that.
Absolutely. We actually see autonomous vehicles is really serving a population that whether, for whatever reason they're unable to drive themselves, we see that as a huge opportunity. We've actually had project teams that do design thinking projects on serving, whether it be the elderly or people who have some type of impairment that doesn't allow them to drive vehicles, and how do we reach them? How do we deal with their specific needs? So we see it as a huge opportunity, and something that we actually work on with our vehicles today to make them more accessible. Then clearly autonomous opens up a whole nother order of magnitude there, and we're very committed to it.
Thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
Just wanted to talk to you about, you had mentioned earlier range anxiety not being as much of an issue with EV adoption rates. And much of that is to do with that 80% plus of the charging occurs at home. But for those of us that aren't homeowners, especially young people, especially millennials who are moving into cities and are less and less often acquiring their own homes, what is GM doing to increase the access of public charging as well?
So a number of things. We're working with the energy companies. We're working with startups. We're working with Electrify America. And then So we think it's, and then we think there's going to be a government role, there's going to be a private role. We've said, to create the right environment for customers, and you're right, some customers aren't going to have home access, or we have to look at how do we provide that in a different way as we go forward. And so we're working with a multitude of organizations trying to collectively solve it. We don't see it as a single issue that we alone have to solve and fund, but we think collectively there's multiple groups. And we're actually having a lot of success working with the energy companies. They see this as an opportunity for them.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Hi, thank you very much for your presence. And seeing how far GM was able to go with diversity and thinking about how enriching cultural diversity can be for the innovation of the company and taking into account the actual political situation, I was wondering what's your opinion on international students entering the US workforce?
Well, General Motors is a big supporter of the Dreamers Act and of DACA. We've been very public about it. And so, we recognize that we need to have the best and the brightest that are going to come from everywhere. And the fact that we're a global company, we already have people that are working from around the world. We have a huge research activity in Israel, and we have operations, even though we're not selling Opel Vauxhalls in Europe anymore, we have activity in Europe, in Korea, in Brazil. I mean, go on and on naming countries, and we recognize that cultural diversity, and also recognize as a global OEM that people don't buy a global product, they buy a product that's right for them. And so understanding what the specific needs are in a specific country, in a specific region, that's been, because we have such a diverse workforce and we're spread out geographically, we think that's been one of the areas where we've been successful. So we see it as critical for talent, and that's why we've been very vocal to the administration on those topics.
Okay. All right.
What a great conversation. Ms. Barra, please accept this gift as a token of our appreciation. And if you'll all join me in thanking Ms. Barra for being here tonight as our distinguished